I want you to think about the last time you filled up your car, or the last time you bought a bag of flour, or a bottle of cooking oil, or paid for a bus ticket. Now I want you to imagine that every single one of those prices jumps 20, 30, 40%, not over a year, but over the next 4 to 6 weeks. That is not a hypothetical. That is the scenario that energy analysts, global shipping experts, and economic advisors to multiple governments are actively calculating right now. Because the Strait of Hormuz, a waterway so narrow you could almost swim across it, at barely 21 miles wide at its tightest point, is effectively closed. And 20% of the world's oil supply passes through it every single day. Or at least it did. Right now, tanker traffic has collapsed. Shipping companies have pulled their vessels. Oil loading at key Gulf ports has been halted. And Brent crude, the global price benchmark, has already crossed $115 a barrel and is heading higher. This is the story of a choke point. And I'm going to show you exactly how tightening that choke point turns into higher prices on your kitchen table, in your car, and in every shop on your street. Let's start with the basics, because you cannot understand the scale of this crisis without understanding what the Strait of Hormuz actually is. The Strait of Hormuz sits between Iran to the north and the Sultanate of Oman and the UAE to the south. It connects the Persian Gulf, where the oil wells of Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Iraq, Iran, Qatar, and the UAE all pump their product, to the Gulf of Oman, and then to the wider Indian Ocean trade routes that supply the entire world. Every single day, in normal times, approximately 17 to 18 million barrels of oil pass through this waterway. That's not just Saudi oil. That's not just Iranian oil. That is the combined output of the most oil-rich region on the planet. Approximately 20% of the world's total oil supply passes through those 21 miles of water. There is no viable alternative. The Strait of Hormuz is, without exaggeration, the single most important choke point in the global energy system. And right now, Iran is threatening to close it entirely. Let me be specific about what's already happening to shipping. Shipping companies that move oil through the Persian Gulf have been pulling their tankers out of the region since the war began on February 28. The risk calculation changed overnight. Insurance costs for vessels operating in the region have spiked to levels that make many voyages economically unviable. Some insurers have suspended coverage for Gulf routes entirely. The result is that hundreds of tankers that would normally be transiting the strait or loading at Gulf ports are instead sitting at anchor, waiting. Meanwhile, Iran struck Saudi Arabia's Ras Tanura refinery with a drone strike earlier this month. Ras Tanura is one of Saudi Arabia's largest oil processing facilities, a complex that handles millions of barrels of crude per day. The strike caused temporary operational disruptions and triggered an immediate price spike in global oil markets. The UAE's port of Fujairah, which had been serving as an alternative oil export route precisely because it sits on the Gulf of Oman side of the Hormuz, has been attacked 3 times in the past 4 days alone. Oil loading there has been halted. What was the last viable bypass around the Strait blockade is now being systematically targeted. Goldman Sachs analysts published a note this week estimating that there is an $18 per barrel risk premium already embedded in current oil prices. If the strait fully closes for an extended period, analysts project prices could reach $120 to $150 per barrel. Let's talk about what oil at $115 and potentially higher actually means for the rest of the world. Brent crude is the global benchmark. When Brent moves, everything moves with it. Diesel prices follow Brent. Aviation jet fuel follows Brent. Petrochemicals, the building blocks of plastics, fertilizers, pharmaceuticals, synthetic fabrics, follow Brent. The International Energy Agency released an official statement this week noting that, before this war began, the global oil market was actually in significant surplus for 2026. Supply was expected to exceed demand. Prices were supposed to be stable or declining. The IEA's own statement said, prolonged supply disruptions could flip the market into a deficit. A surplus turned into a potential deficit. That is what one war in one region, around one waterway has done to the global energy equation in less than 3 weeks. This is the section I need you to pay the most attention to, because this is where geopolitics becomes personal. Pakistan imports essentially all of its petroleum. Every liter of petrol, every liter of diesel, every bottle of LPG cooking gas imported. Pakistan's petroleum import bill is one of the single largest drains on the country's foreign exchange reserves. Every $10 increase in global oil prices costs Pakistan hundreds of millions of additional dollars per year in import costs. Right now, oil is up roughly $30 above where it was when 2026 started. If it reaches $150, that's $60 to $70 above baseline. Pakistan's annual petroleum import bill could increase by $2 to $3 billion compared to projections made just months ago. And who pays for that? Eventually, the consumer. That means petrol prices in Pakistan could rise by 10 to 15 rupees per liter in the near term, potentially more. And because everything in Pakistan moves on trucks running on diesel, vegetables, grain, medicine, building materials, consumer goods, higher diesel prices ripple through every sector of the economy within weeks. India faces a similar picture. India is the world's third-largest oil importer. Every rupee per liter increase in petrol affects hundreds of millions of daily commuters, farmers dependent on diesel irrigation pumps, transport companies whose margins are already thin. India has strategic petroleum reserves that could buffer some of the impact, but those reserves are finite. The agricultural angle is perhaps the most underreported piece of this story. Fertilizer production depends heavily on natural gas, and natural gas prices in Europe have already spiked dramatically due to the Strait of Hormuz disruption. Higher fertilizer prices hit farmers first. Then the price increase passes through to food, to the wheat, rice, vegetables, and commodities that feed South Asia. A Strait of Hormuz crisis that starts as an oil story can end as a food security story. The international response to the Strait crisis has been a combination of public statements and private paralysis. President Trump has demanded that U.S. allies send military forces to help reopen the Strait of Hormuz. Every U.S. ally has declined to send troops. The European Union is not sending military assets. EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas said this week, "Nobody is ready to put their people in harm's way in the Strait of Hormuz. We have to find diplomatic ways." G7 countries have signaled they may coordinate emergency releases of strategic petroleum reserves to try to dampen price spikes. But strategic reserve releases don't solve the underlying supply problem. They just buy time. OPEC Plus has not yet announced any production increase to offset the Gulf disruption. Several OPEC Plus members are themselves under attack and dealing with their own production disruptions. Here is the bottom line. The Strait of Hormuz is the artery of the global energy system. And right now, it is bleeding. Every day that the war continues, every day that Iran fires at Gulf oil infrastructure, every day that tanker companies keep their vessels out of the region, the global economy absorbs more damage. The people who feel it first and feel it hardest are not the hedge fund managers in New York recalculating their oil futures positions. They are the Pakistani family filling up their motorcycle in Multan, the Indian farmer watching his diesel bill, the Sri Lankan family whose cooking gas cylinder just got more expensive, the Bangladeshi garment worker whose food prices keep climbing. This war has a financial address, and it's on your street. Stay informed. Share this video, because understanding this is the first step to demanding something better.